I had a look at an email from my old club, which is Sydney University Rugby Club, and at the bottom of it was a quote from the head coach. And I don't know if you guys know anything about Sydney Uni Rugby Club, but they've won 9 premierships in the last 10 years. They've certainly been dominant in the Sydney football scene, Sydney rugby scene for the last decade. But Chris Malone, who's the head coach, said, when you're reigning premiers, there are no easy games. Every team the premiers meet during the season thinks of it as a grand final for them, and that's how they prepare. No one likes us. That might be a little bit different for the Crusaders, but I'm sure they're envious of the success nonetheless. And when they come up against us, they're ready to play. There are no exceptions. We have to deal with it, and if we do, that can make us a better team. I guess reading that, I suddenly thought, hey, look, the situations aren't a lot different. Everyone's envious of the success of the Crusaders, and right, they should be too. But it's that continual drive for excellence that I think is, that Todd Blackadder mentioned in the film that we saw this morning, or the clip we saw this morning, that keeps driving it. Keeps driving it on and off the field. There are a few key words that have come out of the last 2 days that I've followed up, or that I've noted down. One was leverage. So it's all about how you activate the sponsorship. You're part of this team now. It's now about activating it. The fan has come out, and that's going to come out through what I speak about very quickly. Emotion, that's something you can't take away. And I think obviously too, the Crusaders are a great community. There's a lot of emotion obviously around, you know, the situation in Christchurch over the last couple of years and the rebuilding it's going through. So that emotion is there. And the other word is fit. Now I'm going to add 2 words to that, or to one phrase, which is measure and review. And that's obviously where our business comes in. We're a data business predominantly, but we're about measuring, reviewing and assessing, I guess, sponsorship. So the question you've got to ask yourself as sponsors or partners is, was your partnership successful? So you have to do that, and you've got to remind yourself as part of that why you're actually involved in the first place. So here we go. There were 3 themes that have come through the 2 days that I've seen: fans, digital media and activation. So I'm going to touch on each of those in the presentation. But I just wanted to go back half a step and say, well, what is sponsorship? The first thing I thought of was when we talk about media, when you buy media generally, you talk about buying in 2 spaces. You buy in environment, so you might buy directly into a particular TV show or a particular radio show or a particular website. You're buying into that environment. And I guess the other one is you're buying reach. So you're talking about volume and cost per thousand. They're 2 basic, I guess, strategies to purchase for media. Is that any different for sponsorship? I wouldn't have thought so. There are 2 different buying patterns. One is position. And I think that's what you've all done here. You've bought into the position. You've bought into the environment that is the Crusaders. And well worth it is, as I'll show you. I think the other one is channel. And I think particularly if you're a retail brand, you're buying into a channel, you're buying into reach. So there are 2 elements, I guess, that you look at when you're buying into some sort of sponsorship. You're either buying the position because you want to be there because it's the right fit, or you're buying the channel. You're buying the particular people that asset, I guess, is reaching. So position is about sponsorship fit. I think about a few things when I think about sponsorship fit, and one of them is brand osmosis. So what you're trying to do is you're going to get a little bit of the Crusaders brand or the Canterbury brand rubbed off onto your brand. You're going to find the synergies between the 2 brands, but you're effectively borrowing their equity. That's what you're doing. And I think it's really well worthwhile, but you've got to keep asking yourself, is that exactly where you want to be? The other word that I've added, I guess, after Jim's speech yesterday was ideals. I mean, they're obviously very closely linked, all of those things, but I think it's important to consider. So look, this is, I guess, what we do, and I guess what everyone does in sponsorship, and we look at the life cycle of sponsorship as being quite important. There's assess, measure, and evaluate. And I guess that's where our business has come into its own. I guess it's the heritage of our business, although we do a lot more than just those 3 things at the moment. We do a lot of consulting and we do a lot of strategy pieces as well. But the bread and butter of our business was about assessing and measuring and I guess ultimately evaluating success of sponsorships. Our challenge, though, is not about providing data. That's what we are. We're a data company. We've got lots of data. We've got lots of information. But our challenge isn't to give you just the data. Our challenge is to help you guys tell the right story. And I think that's something that's really important. It's not about simply saying, yes, we're part of the Crusaders family. It's about saying we're part of the Crusaders and Canterbury, and that family for a reason. So that's something that's important, and I think that's something you should bear in mind when you're thinking about your sponsorship. The icons down the bottom there simply are, I guess, a show of the range of things that we use or the data that we use to do that. So we start with media evaluation, social media monitoring and evaluation. We do a lot of market research, some fan segmentation stuff, very similar to what the Gemba guys took you through yesterday. But also market intelligence, because we do this for a number of brands here in Australia, obviously, and around the world. So we can actually start to make comparisons with all sorts of other teams. And I think a team and a brand like the Crusaders is not a New Zealand brand. It's much bigger than that. Obviously the All Blacks is a very global brand, but I'll show you, I think, across Australia and New Zealand particularly, the Crusaders is a very strong brand in both of those markets. Okay, so you've decided you're going to do some sponsorship, you've decided you're going to do some sports sponsorships. The next question you've got to ask yourself is, why rugby union? There's a quick snapshot of rugby union, or actually the sports market in New Zealand. And as you can see, rugby union's way ahead. So we're 50-something percent of the population are avid fans of rugby union in this market. If we have a look more closely here at the things there, the black line above the bar charts there is avidity, and what you can see is a really nice growth in the level of avidity, or fanaticism, I think is the word that Gemba used. That's about those people that consider themselves really strong, passionate fans of the sport. And the fact that it's growing over so many years on such a large base of the population is a very impressive statistic. I'm going to show you something in a minute which, just by comparison to the Australian market, to show you some of the challenges that they're facing, but that is an incredibly strong statistic. One of the things that we know is that if you look at the overall fan base size of the rugby fan in Australia and New Zealand, there are more rugby fans in Australia. We've got a much bigger population, it makes sense. However, there are less avid rugby fans in Australia than there are in New Zealand. So that percentage is so high that there are in fact more avid rugby fans. I'll touch on why that's really important shortly. Here we are, we're just looking at the level of avidity in the different categories, if you like, or the different competitions. So you can see there on the left-hand column is the All Blacks and their support. 90% of those that support the All Blacks say they're avid fans. It's an amazing statistic. But even at the Super Rugby level, which obviously the Crusaders are in, you've got a really strong level of avidity there in green. So there are strong reasons to be involved at this level of the game as well. And even then, when you get down to NPC or ITM Cup, it's still a really strong sport, and it still tells a really strong story of why you should be involved here. So hopefully I'm affirming your decision to be involved here. So here we are. This is the comparison to Australia, I guess, when you look at the three main levels, or the three levels of rugby here, and you can see how much more significant the drop-off is between tests, Super Rugby, and then club rugby. We're not fortunate enough to have some sort of a provincial competition of any great strength. However, Bill Pulver tells me that that's about to change in the next year, so we'll see what happens there. There's all sorts of debates going on there. But look, the avid fans for Wallaby, 60% compared to 90%. It's a very different sport, it's a very different landscape across the two markets. Okay, let's have a quick look then. If we break that down, why do you want to be involved with the Crusaders? Well, there's 500,000 fans of the Crusaders, or just over 500,000 fans, which is a very significant number of fans. So obviously when Warren and the guys from the Crusaders team here can talk to you about numbers of members, numbers of season ticket holders, all those sorts of things. It's important to realise that you're reaching more than those. You're reaching all those people that consider themselves fans of the Crusaders. Just to put that in a little bit of perspective, the Waratahs are the Super Rugby franchise in Australia with the most support. They have around about 700,000 fans. It's probably to be expected in a pretty big market in New South Wales. However, the next best supported team in Australia is the Reds, and that has less support than, in terms of fan base size, in terms of, than the Crusaders do. So that's a very significant number for the Crusaders, and you can see there then how the rest of the teams filter down in New Zealand. Recently we undertook a survey on behalf of SANZAR to ask some questions around the proposed new structure for Super Rugby, or one of the proposed new structures for Super Rugby. In a little bit of a brief rundown, essentially the proposal is around about building two conferences, one that is essentially Australia and New Zealand, possibly with the addition of a Japanese team which might have some imports. Berwick Barnes would be one from Australia. A couple of the other Kiwis that are playing in Japan might join that franchise. And then a separate conference built around 6 South African teams and potentially a couple of others built into that conference. So it's, in some respects it's an unbalanced conference, but what it's about doing is highlighting the local derbies in the two areas, and I guess placating ultimately the insistence of the South African Rugby Union to have 6 Super Rugby franchises rather than the 5 existing, which looks like a promise that I gather has been made. So that looks like a likely sort of structure, but what we did is we started to ask the New Zealand fans, and we also asked the Australian fans, well, who's the most important opposition? And what we can see strongly is, both in Australia and New Zealand, that the local derbies are the most important. The teams that the individual fans most wanted to play were those other national teams from their country. However, the next slide is where it probably gets a little bit more interesting for you guys. Not surprisingly, when we asked all of the fans of Highlanders, Blues, Chiefs and Hurricanes, who did they want to most play? The Crusaders. Probably not surprising, that's the match they're most likely to attend as fans. But when we have a look at the Australian teams and we ask them the same question, well, the Waratahs came up first, the Reds came up second. Not surprising, they're the most traditional teams. If you're not in them, you probably hate them, and they certainly hate each other. But the Crusaders came in third. So of the Australian fans, they would rather see everyone play the Crusaders than the other Aussie teams. So it's a pretty amazing statistic, and it shows you the strength of the Crusaders brand both here and in Australia. Here's another reason to look at the Crusaders as part of the strength. The overall cumulative audience there, I think, 4.7 million, if you can't quite see it. That's the TV audience. Now, just to put that in a little bit of perspective for you, the Chiefs, who played an extra game this year, 4.5 was their total cumulative TV audience. So the Crusaders, that makes the Crusaders the most watched team in this market. So another really strong reason to be part of this franchise. I'm just going to touch a little bit on, without going too deep into our methodology, one of the things that we provide for Warren and the Crusaders is a media evaluation or media equivalency of the value of the brands that appear on the uniforms of the Crusaders, but particularly CAT. And we do that with a process of an image recognition software, whereby we actually collect every image of CAT as it goes across the broadcast, whether that be the actual broadcast of the match, whether it be TV news, whether it be in the print or online news. And we do that, and then we apply a methodology there. So we take the number of seconds of exposure, we apply it through an algorithm which we call QI, which is simply takes into account the size on screen, the duration it's on screen, the number of individual brand hits at any particular time, and the length, the location on screen. So the closer to the centre, ultimately the better. It's a complicated algorithm, but it's important just to know that there are a whole lot of factors that go into that. and ultimately the weighted recall. And from that, we compare that to, I guess, a spot rate for buying TV airtime, and we can make a comparison of what sort of a media equivalency that is. I won't go into the details of the methodology. It's probably not that important, but what it is a great benchmarking tool, because we can do that year on year, we can do that with other brands, we can do that with other teams. So this is not the Crusaders, and I'm not going to reveal who it is, so it's sample data only, but these are the sorts of outputs that we get. So there are 4 different brands of 4 different locations on jersey or grass signage and that sort of thing. So these are the outputs that we get. So as you can see there, the leading sponsor of this particular team was just over $1 million worth of media value based on our methodology, and then going down based on the different levels of assets and inventory. So the important thing for sponsors on that basis is it's a really quick way of understanding where your asset sits, I guess the hierarchy of assets in a sponsorship, and also whether it's performing year on year, whether your branding is making the most of the time that's being given to you, and those sorts of things. So it's one measure of success. We get asked the question a lot about whether media value is a really important measure. We obviously believe it is. It's not the most important, but it's one of a range of metrics that you can use to measure success. And not every brand is interested in it. So if you're about brand awareness, then it's probably a nice measure. If you're not about brand awareness, it's probably a measure that's irrelevant for you guys. Okay, focusing then on the fans. Why are fans so important? Although there's some changing, I guess, trends in the marketplace in sport, but there's a convergence between sports and entertainment. Sport has to be entertaining, and there's also a convergence of the two things, whether it be in concerts. We talked about the fun seeker yesterday, who not only likes to come to Crusaders because it's a great event, but also wants to go and see concerts or watch live festivals and those sorts of things. So sport has to compete in a very competitive marketplace of entertainment. The two things are ultimately intertwined and the same. So we know there that there's great use of technology, there's obviously some choice and big global events. And that's the trend we're finding even when you look at smaller scale events or smaller scales than big events. Why do people want to go to things like the Melbourne Cup? I think Lydia and I touched on this yesterday, that girls want to wear heels when they go out. They can't always do that to Crusaders matches. So these sorts of things are important. Big events are important, and people like to go there. And the challenge is to make Crusaders games, big events, and important things to go to. There are a number of commercial challenges for sports at the moment. Obviously, there's uncertain economy, impacts consumer choice, rising costs and viability of running sports and sports associations, and obviously there's the TV or online experience is competing heavily with actually attending. So there's some of the challenges that the sports face. We know that the governing bodies are always trying to grow into new international areas. I suspect it's not going to be too long before the AFLs decide it's time to put a team over in New Zealand. We know they played over here in Wellington this year. Was it Anzac Day they played? So they played here. We know that they're going to grow. Interestingly enough, I was at a rugby luncheon, which Andrew Demetrio was on the panel recently, and I guess that some questions from the audience were focused around, well, Andrew, the success of the Wanderers in the A-League, does that make your GWS team look not so successful? You're at the bottom of the ladder. Wanderers, first year in the A-League, they won their membership, and matches are all sold out for this current A-League season already, and were well before the season kicked off. That is an amazing success story, and I guess the intimation to Andrew Demetrio was, well, do you feel like you're failing in GWS? And his simple response was, no, it's a 20-year, $1 billion commitment. So I don't think it's too long before he sees another market and exploits it, and he's got the funds to do it. But all sports are trying to challenge for that share of voice. The last point I've got down there is competition for athletes. There are obviously a lot of choices for fantastic athletes. Izzy Folau's the one pictured there, competing for GWS, competing for the State of Origin and the Melbourne Storm, competing for the Wallabies and the Waratahs. He's got a lot of choice. We've obviously seen also what Sonny Bill Williams has done. He's committed to another year with the Roosters. Players are very important to fans, and they have a direct impact. So the Roosters have had, apart from winning the grand final, have had their best year in terms of memberships and audiences and game attendances that they've had for a long, long time. And that, obviously is partly due to Sonny Bill Williams' presence there. So the challenges continued. One is maximising the fan base. There's obviously a dollar value return for every fan that's really important, and I'm going to touch on that in a little bit more detail. Maximising commercial partnerships for both the sponsors and the rights holder. It's about actually making the maximum return and maximum value out of that partnership. Jim touched on the fact that things have to be a win-win when they work best, and that's absolutely true. So both parties need to try and maximise that, and that's a great challenge to do that, to provide best in practice servicing, to provide best in practice opportunities for partners. And I think things like this forum and partners getting together and starting to talk about what they want to do together is definitely a great step into achieving that sort of forum. And obviously the changing media landscape. Media landscape is fragmenting, and one of the things that rights holders have to consider is, can they go direct to consumer? We've seen the EPL do it in this market. We've seen BT buy into the EPL overseas. It's a huge thing that sports have to now consider themselves. Can they go to direct to market and direct to the consumer, and can they profit from that? Can they have a subscription methodology? How do they monetize that through merchandise and ticketing and so forth? So there's a lot of channels to consider, and there's a lot of people competing for that space, not just your traditional media owners anymore. Okay, so here's something. What we did is we had a look at the behaviour of avid fans and compared it to the behaviour of average or regular or fringe fans, depending on which way you want to call it. But the interesting statistics there are they spend 30% more. So there's a direct dollar value to moving fans from being general fans to avid or passionate fans. They're 90% more likely to recall the sponsor. So that's obviously really important. So the bigger the size of your avid fan, the more likely they are to recall the sponsors. They attend 3.3 more games in a season, and they're 91% more likely to consider sponsor brands when they make a purchase decision. And that's a critical, valuable part of being in a sponsorship with a group of fans. I think measuring that is really crucial to understanding why it's important and why we want to keep driving people up the escalator of fanhoods. So here's what I was touching on earlier a little bit about the ARU. It's telling not a great story for the ARU. It's a little bit of a sad story. When you look at, from the glory days of about 2007, they've lost over 1.37 million fans. That's a big number, and if you look at the box in the right-hand side, you'll see that avid fans are spending around about $60 more than general fans every year. I'll let you guys do the maths on that, but if you ask me, that's a lot of money left on the table. So there's a big challenge for the ARU in this sport. It's just interesting, I think, for you guys to start to think about that when, so much of, the viability of the Super Rugby depends on viability both here and in Australia. Okay, brands and brand risks are something I want to touch on, and I guess this is when we start to ask questions of brands. What are we finding out? What are the trends that we're looking at, and what are the trends we're seeing? I think it's really important for sports to understand what their brand is, understand what's different about their brand, why it stands out. And that's something that you've got to sell on to your sponsors, but it's also something as a sponsor that if you're buying into, you've got to understand what those differences are as well. You've got to know who you're wanting to talk to and making sure that they're the same people. There are some broad risks involved, I guess, with involving yourself in sponsorship. Recently, we've obviously seen a number of issues, particularly in the NRL and AFL with drugs in sports. It would have been well publicised over here, I'm sure. But I guess one of the things we just wanted to look at is, does that actually have an effect on the brand and people's likelihood to purchase, or that purchase funnel? And clearly what we've discovered is that it doesn't, which is good news for you. I think it actually reduces the risk. So although there's a really positive message about being involved with a club or a sport, it actually doesn't translate to being a negative message when things are going badly. The clear reflection is all on the players themselves. So there you can see 2/3 say it has no impact on the sponsor in their consideration. All right, 2 quotes there. Sports fans have never had so many options, opportunities, places and events to spend their time and money. In a marketplace so crowded, the battle for fans has become essential to the very survival of sports. And the next quote there is, content is king, which came up yesterday as well. We know that sports fans have on average in their lives, they have on average a week 20 hours to spend on lifestyle choices. When you break that down, they've probably got, I think it's 9 there, 9 interests that they want to spend on lifestyle choices. One of those is sport, one of those is attending sport. That's what that says to me, which is critical for both sponsors and for rights holders, is that you must touch the fans in a number of ways during the week. You can't just wait for weekends to talk to them. Therein lies the importance and I guess the accessibility of social media. When we look at enhancing sponsorships, we know what brands are telling us, that 83% of them are looking at leveraging or enhancing their sponsorship through social media, which is clearly the biggest of all of those things, and I guess it's outweighing traditional methods of hospitality and on-ground events. So that's what brands are starting to do now with their sponsorships. As you can see, as part of their leveraged communication channels, social media comes up as number 1 with 96%. Breaking news for sport, most likely channels, Twitter and Facebook. That's where we're finding out our news now. That's where sports fans are finding out their news. Only 13% for TV. It's a pretty interesting statistic if you want to understand how powerful this beast is becoming. 33% of people will access social media during a meeting just to get sports news. I'm just checking who's on their phone right now. 9% will check sports websites while they're in church. So when the game's on TV, 83% of people will check sports social media at the same time. That's when you should be talking to them too. 61, when they're browsing sports websites, will be checking it. 63% will be checking social media while they're at a game. I don't know what your 3G's like out of AMI Stadium. Right. It's a big challenge for rights holders, and I think ANZ Stadium in Sydney has just invested a very significant amount of money in partnership with Telstra to improve the Wi-Fi capabilities at that venue. The SCG are doing the same in terms of in preparation for the Ashes, which is in January for them. It's an absolutely critical part, and we know that that's what's going to add to the fan experience. I think the message there for sponsors, though, too, is that there are ways to commercialise that for yourselves, and a desire to get involved. But the one thing I would say to you, and I know that it'll come up in a couple of the other slides, is whatever you do, make sure you're adding value to the experience of the fan. They're not going to mind being interrupted. They're not going to mind messaging coming to them, as long as it's adding value to the actual game day experience. Oh, look, this slide tells us exactly that. 43% have no opinion as to whether advertising messages are going to, or they're have an issue, I guess, with advertising during that time or promotions from sponsors. Only 26% dislike it, 16 to 9% either like it or love it. It's worth doing. Just make sure it's adding value to their experience. I'm coming back to content as king. I'm going to add a word to this, and I think this is really important. Good content is king. There is tons of content out there. We know how much content is out there. You've just got to get the right content. Something that's going to add value, something that's of interest, something that's funny. More content isn't necessarily just going to be watched. It has to be good content. The one suggestion I would come up with there, and I'll use an example from our friends again across the ditch at the ARU. One of the things they used to run off their database was like a fantasy and tipping competition. They had less than 2,000 people actually involved and engaged in it. When you start to compare that with the numbers that were involved and engaged with similar games through foxsports.com.au and a couple of their other partners, they were being smashed out of the water. They said, why are we doing this? Our fans are engaging in other places. So they re-engaged, or are re-engaging, with their partners. And I think that's important. You want to go where the people are, so the content has to be good, and if that means partnering up with someone, then that's well worth doing rather than trying to run your own thing. Content can become really expensive. It doesn't have to be, but it can become very expensive. So if you can partner with someone and you can get involved with good content, I would say do it. So I'm going to go through two very quick case studies here. One is ING and the other is Telstra. And the theme I'm going to pick up on here is simply add value to the fan experience. We know that the fan is at the core. So the fan is what's going to drive revenue for the sport. The fan is what's going to drive revenue for you guys as partners and sponsors. And they have to be central to your decision making. You have to add value to what they're doing if it's to work. So here we look at the strategy for ING over the last few years. So the sort of last 4 or 5 years. 2007 to 2009, they were involved in Formula One. What was it about? It was simply about brand awareness. They were trying to take the globe by storm. So they wanted a property that was in a range of international cities. They wanted great exposure, great audiences. Formula One gave them that. It gave them a great deal of brand awareness. I'm not saying it was unsuccessful, they just changed tact. They were very focused on India, they were focused on South America, they were focused on Eastern Europe. They were focused on doing hospitality and visibility. 2010 to 2012, they changed tack and they said, you know what, we're going to be involved with where our heritage is. So we're going to be involved locally in the Netherlands, we're going to be involved with football. And they were obviously going to focus on their core markets of Europe. Not surprising either, this came after the global financial crisis, so they wanted to look back at home, look back at, I guess, their home court and their key markets. Rather than expansion. And I guess the other thing at the bottom there was engagement and activation became their core focus. Not so much visibility, not so much the other things. It was all about engagement and activation. So this is Euro 2012. Outside the venues, what do? They put up a bank of lockers. Their key brand message is we're safe. I'm a fan, I want to keep my stuff safe. It was on message. It's a really simple activation. It's on their brand, they're bright orange. But all in all, what they were saying is what's going to add to the ease of the day, the simplicity of the day, and reinforce our brand messages at Euro. And that's what they did. I think that is a really, really simple execution, but it shows you that it's thoughtful and done really well. With the fan at the centre. So it was focused on needs. It was a genuine service and it was brand relevant. If you can maintain those three things in any execution you do, you're going to find success. Okay, Slide. Slide was a purpose-built Foxtel series 2 years ago. It was very youth-focused. It was about 5 17-year-old kids on their journey of life. It was basically focused on the last 5 weeks of their year 12 year, and they were discovering a range of firsts: first love, first kiss, first car accident, first pill. It was pretty edgy. It was an edgy series, but it was very focused and in part written by 17-year-olds. Telstra wanted to start to talk to that market. They over-index well and truly in 45 pluses and under-index in that youth area, particularly in prepaids. So that's what they were looking at. One of the critical things and one of the reasons Telstra were interested, the whole format of this show right from the outset was to be delivered both online and on air. And the slide 5 were going to talk to the audience consistently. And I guess they were going to use a range of social media. So if you look in the blue box there, 2 of the characters, Ed and Luke, were going to be focused on social media. They were going to continue to talk to the fans through Twitter and through Facebook. A couple of the stunts that were programmed throughout the series was, I think it was episode 3, two of the characters got locked in a stairwell in a building. They didn't have reception on their phone. They finally managed their way right up to the top floor. They had sort of 1 bar of reception. Maybe it was Vodafone, not Telstra. in Australia region. They had 1 bar of reception, just enough to get a text message out, but not enough to call. All those people that had pre-engaged online, all the fans of the show that had pre-engaged online, got that text message at exactly the same time as it went out on air. It was a help message sent to, a group message sent from Ed's phone. And if you had pre-engaged and enrolled and you were on the CRM basically with a mobile number, you got that text at the same time as it went out on air. Really cool little tricks like that. Were played sort of throughout the series to make it feel live. Part of the things that we did in between episodes were that there were stories within a story. So if you wanted more depth to the characters, that was done on sort of mini episodes in between the Tuesday night or Wednesday night showing or whatever night of the week it was on Fox 8. So you could get more depth. If you wanted to, you could engage with the characters all week and then just wait for the Tuesday show. If you didn't want to engage at a different level, you could still watch just the regular 1 hour episode and maintain. Music was a key part of the show, and one of the characters, Tammy, was going to write about music. So she was involved with live events, putting on gig videos. We had special gigs, live gigs available only to viewers that were run at the same show, featuring bands that were on the show. Art, we had one of the characters, Eva, was a graffiti artist, but she wanted to talk to the fans through the art channel. So we talked through different blogs and different forums through art. And similarly, Scarlett, one of the girls, was a fashionista, so she had a Tumblr blog. We had fashion stores, her latest tips and things like that, all running through. So there were different levels that each character could associate themselves with the things. Here's, I guess, the model of how we did it. And the reason I bring this up is I think this is something that can be done for sports. So we had a series of prequels to introduce the characters, before episode 1. So if we think of episode 1 being round 1, this is the sort of thing that we should be doing as partners and as, I guess, the Crusaders talking to our fans. We talk to them before the season. We tell them what's going on, who's in, who's out. Then we go to episode 1 or game 1. Then back online we were. So we had all sorts of more information that could come up, and then we'd go to episode 2. So you can see there, that was the sort of information that we would have in between each week on the main page. We'd have exclusive videos, we'd have shareable games, a graphic novel that was drawn by the artist that I was talking about before, user-generated content, companion sites and branding and cross-promotion. One of the things we wanted Telstra to do was engage with these guys in a meaningful way and continue to add value to what they were doing. So Telstra were responsible for putting on gigs, the sort of live gigs that watchers could go to that were featuring the bands, but we also developed a behind-the-scenes show. And I'll just show you quickly a show reel from that. get onto this.
We don't sleep when the sun goes down. We don't waste no precious time. All my friends in the loop, making up for teenage crime. We don't sleep when the sun goes down. We don't waste no precious time. All my friends in the loop, making up for teenage crime.
There isn't an average shooting day. It changes every day.
Wardrobe, makeup.
This particular job has been really exciting for us.
We don't waste no precious
Was I ready? I don't have any regrets about it.
I'm not going to mention names.
I've never been in love, so I don't believe in it.
There's secret girl code. There really is.
teenage.
So the lucky thing we had there, and I guess in terms of good content, the lucky thing we had there is because we were building the whole show both on air and online at the same time, as we had the same production values online that we had on air. So everything that we did on air was shot as if it could go, online was shot as if it could go through, natural broadcast. That was enabled us, I guess, to tap into this early. That was a unique television problem, but it worked well. And I think the key thing for Telstra there was it was about adding value to all of the fans of the show. So, in summary, I guess I just wanted to focus on a few things. And this is what brands are telling us consistently. I guess this is the trends of the marketplace of most sponsors that we're finding. They're doing fewer, they're doing them bigger, and they're doing them better. And I think that's part of being successful is to do those things, focus your energies on those things you can be really successful at and do them well. Leverage and activate, that's been the theme of the last 2 days, and it's a hard thing to do, it takes resources, but it doesn't always have to be massive, it doesn't always have to be big like Carlton Draft. There can be really simple things that add value to the fan and add value to the fan experience, or draw on the partnerships around the room that can actually help create win-win situations. The third one there, I guess I've just focused on, which is adding value to the experience. I'm just going to skip to one last slide here, which I guess is what our clients are telling us in terms of evaluation and those sorts of things. So at the core of major sponsorships in terms of evaluation is still that media exposure. They're asking for that. They're talking about sponsorship valuations. Post and pre is definitely something that is worthwhile doing, looking at what you should be expecting to get out of a sponsorship and then assessing whether that's actually what you did achieve at the end of a period. Understanding the impact. So media value is one measure, but actually understanding how that changes people's attitudes to your brand is key. It's one of the things we spend a lot of time doing with big brands is starting to understand what sort of impact that has on their purchase behaviour. For one of the breweries in Australia, we did this with a series of events that they activated. We asked people at event or at that experience whether they were more likely to consider that brand as a result of the experience, as well as other questions around how they rated the experience as a whole. That was great because what it meant at the time is that particular brand were able to change some of their activation based on the feedback they received. But then what we did is we started to ask people, those same people, 6 and 9 months down the track to see whether it still had an impact on what they were doing in their purchase behaviour and changing habits. And that was as close as we got to really understanding, I guess, what that sort of activation did or what that sort of sponsorship had directly as an impact on the people that were part of it. And they're continuing to do it, so it must have been working. Fan segmentation is really important. Obviously, Richard and the Gemba guys went through that in some detail yesterday. I guess my advice to sponsors there is make sure you know which ones are the fans you're talking to. And it's not just classic demographics, it's about why they're there, whether they're there for fun, whether they're passionate fans. One of the things that we've started to discover too is that there are different sort of psychographic reasons as to why people are there as well. We know that there are particularly some people that love going to the games because they love the mathematics behind the game. They like knowing the statistics. They like analysing the game. They like seeing the decisions that are being made by the coach and those sorts of things. And it's important to cater for those. I know that the sorts of Wi-Fi activity that some of the AFL clubs have been looking at in conjunction with the MCG is providing the statistics that the coaches are looking at with the the amount of kilometres people are running, their heart rate monitors, all those sorts of things. There are certain groups of fans that just dig that sort of statistic stuff. So if you can get it, you're adding value to those people that do that. So not only understand whether you want to target, an older demographic or a married, the family demographic, but start to understand why people are going. If they're going there to be social, help them be social. If they're going there because they want to analyse the game, help them analyse the game. Look, product testing, brand and reputation research, event research I just touched on. I guess that's about actually understanding what happens to those people and how it impacts them versus people that weren't exposed to a particular event or activation. So you can really start to compare the results of things that are happening. Economic impact, we do a whole lot of stuff around economic impact for government organisations. So I think obviously in the 2011 the Crusaders travelling around to however many different towns and cities to play and not having any home games would have had direct impact on the on the finances of those particular communities, and it's a very valuable commodity and something you should look at. I don't know if you do, Warren, but pre-season games and things like that, it has a very significant impact and it's very measurable, and I guess for you guys it's actually about extracting as much money out of the government as you can for that sort of thing, and supporters. Look, I'm going to leave it there, but I'm really happy to answer any sort of questions. There's a little bit of a summary of stuff we do for rugby guys, but we work for a lot of the AFL clubs and NRL clubs as well as the brands here in Australia, and it's I guess it's something that people debate a lot. Value of some of the research, some of it's expensive, some of it's not. There are some really simple ways to start to segment things and understand who you're talking to and whether or not you are actually reaching the people you want to talk to with the right messages.